Aisha adjusted her name tag, straightened her blazer, and took a deep breath before stepping onto the hotel floor. The Emerald Crown, one of the city's most prestigious boutique hotels, ran on precision, and as assistant manager, she ensured everything functioned flawlessly. The morning rush had just settled when she spotted an unfamiliar figure at the reception, a tall young man with sharp features and an effortless confidence that didn't quite belong among the usual guests. He leaned against the marble counter, scrolling through his phone, his crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, his watch gleaming under the golden chandeliers. His posture was relaxed, but there was something searching in his gaze, as if he were both observing and waiting. Aisha approached the receptionist, Sarah, who looked equally puzzled. "Who is he?" she whispered. "He says he's here for work," Sarah replied. Before Aisha could ask further, the hotel manager, Mr. Kamal, appeared, his presence commanding as always. "Aisha, meet Zion. He's the owner's son. He'll be interning here for a few months." Aisha stiffened. The owner's son? Of course. That explained the polished arrogance, the ease with which he stood there, knowing this world already belonged to him. Mr. Kamal continued, "Zion, before you start, I want you to shadow Aisha. Learn from her. If you're serious about understanding this business, you start at the ground level." Zion turned his gaze to Aisha, his lips curving into something between a smirk and genuine curiosity. "So, you're the one I have to impress." Aisha folded her arms. "Not at all. I just don't have time for babysitting." Mr. Kamal shot her a look, and she sighed. "Fine. Stay close, don't get in my way, and actually do the work." Zion chuckled, falling in step beside her as she led him toward the operations office. "Not a warm welcome," he mused. "I don't have time for warm," Aisha replied coolly. As they moved through the hotel, Zion took in everything: how staff moved, how guests were handled, the unspoken rhythm of a place that only those who worked it could understand. But Aisha noticed something else. He wasn't just playing along, he was actually paying attention. Later, as she briefed him on front desk protocols, she caught him watching her, not in an intrusive way, but as if he were trying to figure her out. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Zion's smirk softened. "Believe it or not, I want to prove something." Aisha raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. She had seen people come and go, but something about him felt different. She didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something unexpected, something that would change everything. Zion adjusted quickly, surprising Aisha more than she cared to admit. He didn't just observe, he engaged, learning the ins and outs of hotel operations with an intensity that didn't fit the stereotype of a privileged heir. When guests complained, he handled them with an easy charm. When staff struggled, he jumped in without hesitation. Aisha found herself reluctantly impressed. One evening, after a particularly chaotic day, they stood on the hotel's rooftop terrace, overlooking the city bathed in golden twilight. The sky was streaked with amber and violet, the air thick with the scent of fresh rain. Zion handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "You always work this hard?" he asked, leaning against the railing. Aisha blew on her coffee, shrugging. "Someone has to." Zion studied her. "You act like the hotel belongs to you." She chuckled. "Maybe because I actually care about it." He didn't laugh. Instead, he said, "I envy that." Aisha turned to him, brows furrowed. "Envy what?" "Caring about something so deeply. I've spent most of my life being handed things, never really earning them." He exhaled, watching the city lights flicker below. "I thought this internship would be pointless, but—" he looked at her then, his voice quieter. "You make it feel different." Aisha's heartbeat stuttered. She wasn't used to this, being seen. She had always been the dependable one, the girl who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. But Zion wasn't just acknowledging her skills, he was acknowledging her. The days that followed felt different. Lighter. Dangerous. There were moments, fleeting, charged, impossible to ignore. The way his fingers brushed against hers when he handed her a file. The way his gaze lingered when he thought she wasn't looking. The way her breath hitched when he stood too close, the scent of his cologne weaving into her senses. Then, one evening, it happened. They were closing up the front desk, the lobby empty except for the soft hum of a jazz tune playing overhead. Aisha stretched, rolling her shoulders. Finally done. Zion smiled. Not quite. She turned, confused. What do you mean? He hesitated, then said, There's something I need to do before this night ends. Before she could ask what, he reached for her hand, his touch deliberate, his thumb tracing small, nervous circles against her skin. Aisha should have pulled away. She should have reminded herself who he was, what he represented. Instead, she let him hold her hand. I don't know what this is, he admitted, his voice low, but I don't want it to end. For once, Aisha didn't have an answer. She just knew that her world was shifting. And she wasn't sure if she was ready. Aisha had never believed in fairy tales, but for a brief moment, she let herself believe in Zion. Days blurred into nights, stolen glances turned into whispered confessions, and somewhere between training sessions and late-night coffee, she let her guard down. Zion wasn't just persistent, he was convincing. He made her believe that what they had was real, that he wasn't just passing through her world, he was choosing to stay. Until everything unraveled. It started with small changes. Missed calls. Delayed responses. The way he suddenly seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. Aisha tried to ignore it, tried to reason with herself. Maybe he was busy, maybe she was overthinking. But then came the whispers. Syra pulled her aside one afternoon, her expression tight with worry. I heard something, she said cautiously. About Zion. Aisha's stomach coiled. What? Syra hesitated, but then sighed. That he's only here to prove himself to his father. That this internship, it's just a test. Aisha's breath caught. That's not true. I hope it's not, Syra said softly. But be careful. That night, as Aisha was leaving the office, she heard voices from inside the manager's office. One of them was unmistakably Zion's. She hesitated, then stepped closer, the door slightly ajar. Good work, Mr. Kamal was saying. Your father will be pleased. You learned the ropes quickly. Zion's voice followed, casual, almost indifferent. Yeah, thanks to Aisha. She trained me without even realizing it. Aisha's breath froze in her chest. Mr. Kamal chuckled. Well, she's a hard worker. You played your role well. Zion's next words shattered whatever was left of Aisha's fragile hope. Yeah. It was easier than I thought. The air felt suffocating. The walls of the hotel, the place she had poured her heart into, felt suddenly unfamiliar, like a stage where she had been the fool, not the star. Aisha stepped back, her heels clicking against the marble floor. The sound made Zion turn. Their eyes met through the crack in the door. For a moment, everything stilled. Then, he was moving toward her. Aisha, wait. But she didn't. She walked away, not running, not crying, but unraveling from the inside. Zion caught up to her just outside the lobby, grabbing her wrist. Aisha, listen. She yanked free. Was I just a game to you? Her voice shook, but not with weakness, with fury. Zion hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. It wasn't like that. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Then tell me, what was it like? He opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that silence, Aisha had her answer. She turned and walked away. This time, he didn't stop her. Aisha didn't crumble. She didn't waste her nights wondering if Zion had meant even a fraction of the words he had whispered under city lights. Instead, she moved forward. Quitting the hotel was the easiest decision she had ever made. She walked out with her head high, leaving behind the place that had once felt like home but now felt tainted with betrayal. 3 months later, the world looked different. The Emerald Crown was no longer her universe. Instead, a cozy cafe nestled in a quiet street bore her name on the glass. It wasn't grand, but it was hers. Built from the same dedication that had once run that hotel. And then, one evening, Zion walked in. Aisha had been wiping down the counter when she felt it, that presence she once knew too well. She looked up, and there he was, standing near the doorway, hesitation in his stance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Zion exhaled. You actually did it. Aisha set the cloth down, her expression unreadable. Did what? This. He gestured around. Left. Built something of your own. I always could, she said simply. I just didn't need to prove it to anyone. Zion's jaw tightened. Aisha, I know I hurt you. She met his gaze, steady and unwavering. You did. He swallowed, searching for words. I never meant for it to happen like that. It started as a challenge, but somewhere along the way, you became real to me. Aisha studied him, but she felt nothing. Not anger, not longing. Just clarity. She stepped around the counter and walked toward him until they stood just inches apart. You know what the saddest part is, Zion? He shook his head. I might have believed you once, she said softly. But the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just break trust. It changes people. Zion's shoulders tensed, as if bracing for the inevitable. Aisha exhaled. I don't hate you, Zion. I just don't care anymore. She watched as the truth settled over him, saw the flicker of realization in his eyes. He had lost her. Not because of what he did, but because he had taught her exactly how to live without him. He gave a small, bitter smile. I guess I deserve that. Aisha didn't confirm or deny it. She simply stepped back, gesturing toward the door. Take care, Zion. He hesitated, then nodded. And this time, he was the one walking away. Aisha turned back toward her cafe, breathing in the scent of fresh coffee and warm pastries. She wasn't just fine. She was free.